For those of you that are new and do not know me, my name is Ana. I'm the founder of Savvy Cat Realty. It's a buyers-only realty company in Portugal that is also location independent. And today we are going to talk about the renting market, both from a buyer perspective and from a tenant perspective and from a landlord perspective. And we're going to start with the tenant perspective in a bit. I'm just going to see if there is some more people joining. I'm told there's already one viewer, which is great. I do not know your name because it doesn't pop up, but thank you so much for watching. I'm actually not very used to these lives. It's rather new to me, so do forgive some mistakes when the comments pop up if I mistake names and that kind of thing. Today I'm here in Caldas, and it's actually getting sunny in Portugal. It's really nice. Caldas is more in the center, and my grandfather used to say that it's where the winter comes to spend the summer. So it usually doesn't get too warm here, but it's a nice city and it's central. And I think I'm going to dive into the theme. Oh, there's a new viewer. Thank you so much. So we will start with the rent prices versus salaries and local economy, and the steep differences between big cities and smaller cities when it comes to renting. So we will start with the big cities because obviously there's usually when there is the most interest, and that's also where the market is higher because there is the most people looking out for it. So, and Porto and Lisbon are the two biggest cities of Portugal, and Lisbon, being the capital, is obviously the most sought after. And saying that, the prices in Lisbon are a bit crazy. And if you take in consideration that the minimum wage in Portugal is 600 euros, more or less, you can't find an apartment for less than 500 euros in Lisbon. So you can see there's a problem there. And even rooms, I've seen people ask for 400 euros for rooms. It's not sustainable, but there is that much demand there, so that happens. So because there is that much demand there, the rentals go really fast. I own rentals. Oh, thank you so much. Always saying that you love my interview. I really appreciate the feedback, and I'm really glad that you're here today. I'm going to try and follow on with my conversation because I get lost really easily. So we'll come back to the comments later on, if that's okay. So I was saying about Lisbon and how fast-paced the market can be there because there is such a huge demand. And also the AL dropped the things off balance a bit more, but we'll go back to that later. So in the big cities like Lisbon and Porto, if you are looking to rent an apartment there, do not start looking more than 1 month before you are going to move because things go fast. So basically, if I'm renting my apartment and I actually own in Porto, we have some in Lisbon, but I'm not the one who manages it. And for Porto, that has slightly less demand than Lisbon, and the prices are lower but not that much lower, sometimes when I do need to rent an apartment, sometimes I don't even go into the market because I get referrals, but when I do go into the market, I post announcement ads on a rental group, and within the day I have enough requests to fill 2 days of visitors, and I don't need more than that. I just take my pick from that. So I just need to leave my ad up. The thing is, this also happens because we usually rent at prices that are considered lower than the market standards because we like to rent long term and to keep the people there at fair prices. But for this reason, the apartments that are fair priced, they go fast, very, very fast. So as I was saying, I just need to leave the ad up for one day. So if you want to rent in a big city, you really have to be on top of things. And the ads that stay online for more than 1 or 2 weeks, it's not a good sign, because either the apartment is not as advertised and it's actually terrible, or the landlord is making unreasonable demands. And what you can consider unreasonable demands can be things like more than 3 months rent. And I know this can be a common practice for foreigners, but it's not normal in Portugal at all. So do not pay more than 3 rents when you are renting an apartment. The standard practice is the rent that you are moving, so plus 1 safety rent and plus 1 deposit, the safety deposit for damages and so on, that is usually the same amount as rent but may differ. And there is no really legislation limiting how much you can ask, so it's not illegal to ask for 6 months rent, but it is terrible for the market and terrible for the renter. And if you do pay 6 months rent and you end up having a terrible landlord, you are stuck there. You can't leave and you can do nothing about it because they won't give you your money back. So do not do that. You just put yourself in a terrible situation and you make these kinds of unreasonable demands go in the market. And I understand why some people may do this, because the market is demanding. It's hard to find good things, and having the possibility to do that does give you that advantage, but it can end up being, a bullet for yourself. So be very careful with those kind of situations. So I'm also going to tell you about another thing, that is, most landlords in Portugal do not use agencies. And this is a fact. So there are very little landlords in Portugal that use agencies, because in most cases they don't need it. You just need to put an ad up either on Facebook groups or on the big sites like Imovirtual and Idealista, and you have more than enough requests for tenants. You don't need to pay an agency for commission. The people that use agencies are either because they really don't have the time to just do the showings on their own, or because they are on a foreign country, but it's not the norm at all. So when you go and try and find rental through an agency, you will be extremely limited, because the agency will only show you the listings, the rentals they have signed, and that is a very, very small portion of what is in the market. So you will not be getting a real sample of what's available in most cases. So I do offer a service that goes around this, and since we are not portfolio based, we are able to get private listings. You can look that into my website, but I will tell you more about that later. I will stick to the topic at the moment. And another thing I want to tell you about from the tenant's perspective is what the landlord can and cannot do. So I've heard some, terrible stories about people that rented, most of it from friends, and my experience with rental wasn't very positive either. So basically, when I rented, my landlord, he ran a bunch of ALs, and so his job, his living was basically running those rentals. And he was always on top of things. He would show up with no warning and just keep insisting that he needed to raise the prices and that kind of thing. And that's actually not how things work. The landlord is not allowed to just show up in your door and just request to enter. By law, they have to give you at least 1 day warning. I don't know if it's 1 day or 3 days, but they cannot just show up and request to come in. or just come in with the key. I heard people who do that. That's not legal. So that's something you can definitely complain about. And I do understand that tenants may be in a tricky situation when they get this kind of problems with the landlord, because if the landlord is not keeping their end, like if you have problems with appliances and they're not repairing, if they are invading your privacy, that kind of sort of situation, the landlord is in a tricky position, because to face them, they may be kicked out. Well, the process isn't that easy, but the contract may be terminated. There usually is, both parties can terminate the contract if they give 1 to 3 months warning that is usually written into the contract. And so it is a tricky situation, because if if the landlord decides that you are too much trouble, they can just tell you, oh, you have to get out next month. And I understand no one wants to be in that situation. So it is tricky to be a renter in Portugal, and you have to be very careful with the contract and very careful with what kind of situations you go into. Definitely do not rent an apartment before you at least did a virtual tour, or someone that was on a live call with you and that is impartial and will tell you exactly what they saw, because it's not that uncommon that the problems are not listed in the ads. And now we're going into the final part of our tenant perspective, that is ALs versus long-term rentals. And what is an AL? An AL is the alojamento local, is the policy and the system that is used for short-term rentals, but some landlords started using that for long-term rentals too, because the AL has some advantage and can be more profitable for the landlords, but it has very high rotation and has much more risk of damages, because people rotate a lot more. So some landlords just get tired of that and start renting their AL long term. And if you do see this kind of situations, or if it's just a low season rental, because that also happens a lot, like they rent short term during the high season, usually that is summer, and during the low season they will rent long term at lower prices to keep the place occupied and generating income. And that can be a good deal, but it depends if you are willing to leave when the high season comes. So the advantages of AL for tenants' perspective is that it is mandatory to include the bills and the costs. So if it is an AL, the price will be all-inclusive, and that's mandatory by law, because ALs operate as businesses, so they are comparable to a hotel when it comes to legal registry, and they are not allowed to charge you the bill separately. Some landlords will put a limit on those bills. That is a very common practice, but it's technically not really legal. But I do understand where they come from, because ALs pays bills as business, so they are very much higher than the normal rates for personal use. So the bills can accumulate steeply when it comes to ALs. And when it comes to long-term rental, of course, it's a lot safer. And usually the standard practice is a 1 year renovatable contract. By law, it's technically 3 years, but most people do 1 year. Sometimes you will see 6, and sometimes you will see more, but it's very, very hard to find rental contracts for more than 3 years periods, and even the 3 year period is rare. So, especially in the big cities. In the smaller towns, it's completely different situation, because in the big cities, you can pay like 500 euros for a studio, and that will be considered normal. And if you go into like the surroundings of a smaller city like Coimbra or Aveiro, you can find a 2-bedroom apartment for 250 euros on like the villages. So it is a huge difference when it comes to location, and that's because, of course, of demand of the big cities. I think that's all for the tenant's perspective that I had to cover. I do have my topics here. And if anyone wants to ask me any other questions that they would like to know about something, if they are worried from a tenant's perspective, now would be the time. I'm still a bit awkward with all this. I'm not used to doing lives at all. So I'm not sure exactly how long to wait, and I'll just wait a few minutes to see if anyone has anything to say. If not, I'll come back to it on the end and reply to the question. I have another comment here that it was before, but I'm only reading it now, saying that they liked my interview with Manson. Thank you very much. It was it was actually my first podcast, but Manson is just such a great host. It really made things easier and kept me and you guys, the viewers, kept me talking for a long time. So it went great. Thank you so much. So now we are going into the landlord's perspective. And when it comes to the landlord's perspective, I'm guessing the first topic will always be yields. So people want to know what kind of return they get from their investment. So if you are thinking about buying something for investment and for renting, there is some important factors that you need to consider. One of them is if you are going to go the short-term rental path, or if you are going to go down the long-term rental path. And these are very different because, as I was telling, AL has very specific legislations, and property will be basically registered as business. So basically, you will pay retrofit on it if you decide to take it out of the AL regulator. And because of this, a lot of people are trying to sell their ALs right now because it's harder to rent. They don't get as much profit because short-term rentals aren't a thing because the tourism is, well, not possible right now. And they have to pay a lot of utilities because of the business situation of the apartment. So some people asked for loans to get the ALs, and now they are in a very tricky situation and they are trying to sell it. So you will see, if you are hunting on the property market, you will see some lower than usual prices that are from ALs, but you have to be careful with them because they can come with a high price of the converting city if you want to convert them back. And I think even if you don't want to convert them back, you still have to pay some taxes to get the transmission made. So be very careful with the AL situations and do not sign anything before you make sure how many taxes you have to pay, because that will depend on how profitable that AL was on the past few years. So going to a more yield perspective, the ALs are able to generate more income monthly and yearly and can be more profitable, but they are also harder to manage because they rotate faster and you have to have someone to manage them, or you have to have a lot of time to manage yourself, because probably the tenants are going to change every week or every 2 weeks, and you have to do the cleaning and the checkup and see if anything is damaged. Often it is, so you have to replace it. There is more risk of damages and having losses on that way. But obviously, because the prices are come to be more similar to tourism, it gets more yields depending on you being able to keep it filled the whole month or year. So when it comes to ALs, you are probably able to get 10 years return on investment rather easily if you get a good manager and you are able to advertise the property properly. It's not that hard to get a 10-year return on investment. But you also have to take into consideration that you have more costs and more risks. And it's harder to maintain because the market is less stable. So right now, that the tourism is taking a huge hit. The people with the ALs are struggling because that market isn't stable and they don't get people to fill their ALs. On the other hand, for the long-term rental, it is a very stable option, especially if you try to get tenants that stay longer. That's what I do. Honestly, I don't like the headache of just trying to look for someone every year. I always try to find people that stay longer. And the most recent rentals we have, most of them are from young couples that probably will want to buy from a few years from now, but they just want somewhere stable to be for a while. And it's great because they don't give me any trouble. They don't do any damages. They're usually very responsible people, and they never are late to pay. Of course, that depends on your screening, but that income is just there and stable for a long time, and you just have to have the trouble of finding someone else, every like 3 or 4 years. So I have a question here. I'll go back to that later as it is a bit off topic. So I was telling about the long-term rentals. I do believe they can be a very good option for if you're not so much concerned about short-term income and short-term return on investment. They can be a very, very good option for a long-term saving and stable passive income, because basically if you make a good investment and you are smart more buying the property, especially around this time that the market is lower and it's very easy to get properties at good prices at the moment. So I'm predicting probably until September, October, it will be the best time to buy, because after that the tourism will start to recover and the market will start to recover too. So if you buy a property at a good price, the possibility is that you are probably going to be able to sell it for a higher price later, so you're not going to lose on it anyway. And if you rent for long term, you just don't have to worry that much about it, and it will just be generating that passive income, and you can keep doing that for as long as you want. Or if you just decide you want to get rid of it, you can just sell it and you still make a profit. So I really like the long-term renting option. There is also, of course, risks. Like everything in rentals, there are risks. And someone is asking me if I have furnished rentals. Sometimes I do, but at the moment all our rentals are full. We just may have a room in Portugal. I would have to check with my uncle because it would be his property, but I'm pretty sure everything is full at the moment. But if we do get open free apartments or rooms and they go into the service I offer, so the service I offer, if there is someone asking and that apartment or room fits, we will propose them to them. So we are also able to get off-market properties with our service. And if there's also, I know other owners, so that can happen. And I got a bit lost. I was talking about the risks. There is always risks with rentals. Sometimes people stop paying, and it's a huge problem. And you have to be very careful with the screening of people, so that's why a lot of landlords will ask for proofs of income. And IRS, that kind of thing, just to be sure that you are able to pay the rent every month. Because if people stop paying the rent, it is it is a headache. Because basically, the law is a bit faster now, but you have, if they stop paying, you can send them a written warning. And if they don't reply within 30 days or pay the rent within 30 days, we can start a process to kick them out. But it can take a while. So it is always a risk, and some landlords get a bit traumatized by it, because especially the older properties and older rentals, that process can take a very long time. And it's very hard on the landlords, because they just often get the place all damaged, and they have to put their money to recover it, and the person just goes away, because usually they don't have money to pay. So even if you sue them, you don't get the money back. So from a landlord perspective, there is always that concern. So it's good to do good screening with the tenants. I think that's all I had to say from a landlord's perspective. I'm going to go into Aiden's question, and that is, what is my take on these refurbished properties being sold with no habitation license? I'm pretty sure that's not legal. So first of all, I have kind of a problem with the refurbished properties, because in most cases the renovation is terrible. So basically they will do completely cosmetic renovations that make the things look good, but they are not good. And the best way to tell that is happening is looking at an energy certificate. So if you see a really pretty property that has an E energy certificate or D energy certificate, stay away from it, because it's a cosmetic renovation, and it's going to give you a lot of troubles in the long time. So, that's a very good question. The taxes on long-term rentals. There is taxes to be paid on long-term rentals. If I'm not mistaken, is 25%. They are quite high. I will give you that. I don't know if it's 25 or 30%. It's in the AL, the direct taxes are a bit lower. I think it's 20 or 22%, but I know they are lower than in the long-term rental. So that is something to take into consideration. And that's why I say that with long-term rentals, the yields are lower than with ALs too. Anyone has any other questions? Okay, so we're almost down to half an hour talking. I'm impressed with myself. So I think this will be all for today. Thank you so much for everyone who watched. And thank you so much for your insightful questions. It's very nice to have feedback from viewers. And I'll see you all next week, probably next Friday. Wait, I have another question here. What is an acceptable energy rating? I would say take no less than C. I usually only look for B minus or up. So B minus, B, and A plus. I don't look for anything lower than that for myself. And another thing, supposedly it is mandatory to say the energy certificate on the rentals, but this is very recent, so some people don't even know that. I actually just realized that last year. So a lot of landlords don't have the energy certificate requested for their properties, just because they don't know it's mandatory. So that will happen. And with the long-term rentals, it is the standard practice that it is plus bills, and the tenant can put the bills in their own name. Sometimes the landlord will include in the price, but it's not the standard practice. Okay, so yeah, I think this time it will be all, and see you next Friday.